I woke to an ear-splitting crash. The sound reverberated through the hallway, as if a bomb had gone off right inside my home. My heart lurched. Adrenaline rushed straight to my fingertips. Rolling out of bed, I nearly tripped over the shoes I'd kicked aside the night before. The time on my phone read 6:12 a.m., far too early for visitors, let alone random acts of destruction. Fear crept into my throat. I jerked the bedroom door open and dashed down the corridor, my bare feet slapping the hardwood floors. A second smash resounded, then a furious voice broke through the chaos. My mind scrambled to place that voice, but I couldn't quite identify it until I reached the living room and saw glass shards glittering on the ground. Someone had just shattered the rectangular glass pane on my front door. It was a face I recognized from neighborhood meetings. An older blonde woman in a sharp blazer, an HOA badge pinned to her lapel. She glared at me from the other side of the ruined threshold, her eyes electric with rage. My gut twisted. It was Margaret Pierce, known locally as the HOA Karen, infamous for sending stern violation letters over the tiniest infractions: a dog barking too long, a flower pot in the wrong spot, a kid's bicycle left near a driveway. But I never imagined she'd escalate to this. The crisp morning sunlight poured over broken glass, illuminating each jagged shard. My hands shook with disbelief. "What in the world are you doing?" I snapped, voice still ragged from sleep. "You just destroyed my door." Margaret didn't flinch. She brandished a thick file of papers, which fluttered in the breeze. Her expression was a mix of self-righteous fury and smug satisfaction. "You're in gross violation of Article 13, she announced. "I've rung this bell a dozen times this week. Left 3 notices demanding you address the color mismatch and structural hazard of your porch. You never responded." My jaw dropped. "Mismatch? Hazard? You can't barge onto my property and smash my door over a paint job," I said. She scoffed, stepping over shards of glass as though they posed no threat at all. I stood halfway inside, halfway out, anger pulsing in my temples. My wife, Eleanor, normally handled these sorts of disputes with calm logic, but she wasn't here this morning. She was out at the station. Elena happened to be the chief of police in our district, though few neighbors realized that fact. Margaret evidently had no clue, or if she did, she was far bolder than I imagined. "This is private property," I told Margaret, trying to keep my cool. "You just committed vandalism. Step back before you cause more damage." She tightened her grip on the file and pointed a trembling finger at the porch columns. "Those new pillars you installed don't match the community aesthetic. It's a violation of mandatory uniformity. The board gave you a deadline to remove or repaint them. You ignored it." I stared at the white columns. They were new. Yes, Elena and I had replaced the rotting ones last month, switching from a dull beige to a crisp white that popped nicely against our brick exterior. We'd been meaning to file some paperwork with the HOA, but got sidetracked by other events. Apparently, that slight oversight had unleashed the wrath of Margaret. "I was going to handle the forms," I muttered, trying to rein in my frustration. "But that doesn't give you the right to break my door." A malicious glint sparked in her eye. "The rules allow me to inspect for safety hazards. You refused me entry, so I took necessary measures." She sounded like she was reading from a script. I forced myself to count to 5 in my head. My hands were already itching to call Elena. I knew she'd race over here in an instant, but I didn't want to blow up the situation even more, if that was even possible. The roar of a neighbor's lawnmower started somewhere down the street. Ironically, it served as a reminder that life was still ordinary for the rest of this suburb, even as my front entryway lay in tatters. "Necessary measures," I repeated, voice sharp. "You know what's necessary. Me calling the police. Stand there if you want, but I'm reporting this." Her lips curled in a sneer. "The police? For an HOA matter? Good luck. The board stands behind me on this. You'll only embarrass yourself." My heart hammered. She obviously believed her own brand of twisted authority. I pictured Eleanor in uniform, her calm, steely gaze whenever she encountered lawbreakers who thought they were above the law. Margaret had no idea who she was messing with. I stepped back inside, ignoring the crunch of glass under my slippers, and grabbed my phone from a side table. Margaret followed me to the threshold, huffing as if she owned the place. She dared not cross fully inside, though maybe she had enough sense to realize that would be blatant trespassing. My blood pumped hot as I dialed Elena's personal line. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, babe. I'm heading into a briefing. Is everything okay?" The familiarity of her voice offered a momentary sense of relief. "Not really," I muttered. "Margaret from the HOA just smashed our front door. She's standing here, claiming I violated some porch color rule, but she literally shattered the glass. It's a mess." I heard Elena inhale sharply. "Did she threaten you, or is she still there?" "She's right in front of me," I said, lowering my voice slightly, acting like she has every right to do this. "She's on private property." Elena said firmly, "That's vandalism, destruction of property. I'm on my way. Don't let her leave. Or if she tries, get her license plate. I'll send a patrol unit." I ended the call, my chest tightening. Margaret frowned when she realized I was summoning actual law enforcement. "You better not overreact," she warned. "This is an internal community matter. I'll file a formal complaint with the board about your refusal to comply." I seethed. "I think we're well past mere compliance issues," I replied, voice trembling. "You broke my door. That's a crime." She glared at me for a second. Her bravado flickered with uncertainty. Maybe she'd expected me to cower, to apologize for not following the paint color guidelines. Instead, she was looking at a furious homeowner prepared to involve real police. The next 5 minutes passed in tense silence. I began cleaning some of the glass from the entryway. The morning sunlight reflected off each shard, giving the scene an oddly surreal glow. Every so often, Margaret snapped photos of my porch columns, muttering about violations and how she'd be sure to find me. I wanted to shout at her, but I knew better than to escalate. I simply waited. Then I heard the distant wail of a siren. Margaret stiffened, her eyes darting around like a cornered animal. She didn't expect an actual squad car, I guess. Moments later, a blue and white cruiser pulled up in front of my house, followed by a black SUV with tinted windows. The cruiser's lights flashed, but the siren cut off as soon as the officer parked. 2 uniformed cops stepped out. Right behind them, Elena emerged from the SUV, her police badge glinting in the sunlight. Her posture was commanding, shoulders back, gaze steady. She was everything you'd expect from a police chief, calm, authoritative, and absolutely unimpressed with nonsense. Margaret's jaw dropped. She blinked in confusion. Elena approached, acknowledging the uniformed officers with a nod. Then her eyes fell on the shattered door. "Are you okay?" she asked me. "I'm fine," I said, stepping aside so she could see the damage. "But my door is ruined." Elena kept her composure. "And this is the person responsible." She nodded toward Margaret, who stood frozen, still clutching her folder. Margaret stammered. "Wait. What's going on? Who are you to barge in here like that?" Elena's lips curved into a thin line. "I'm Chief Elena Martinez," she said, voice unwavering. "That's my husband you decided to harass, so I would advise you to choose your next words carefully." The color drained from Margaret's face. She seemed to be processing the situation for the first time. Her bravado wavered. The uniformed officers moved in to examine the broken shards and the doorframe. One asked me for details, taking notes. I explained how I woke up to the sound of glass smashing, discovered Margaret forcibly damaging the entry. The officer's eyebrows shot up. "M.A.A.M., he said, addressing Margaret. "Did you break this door?" She licked her lips nervously. "It was an inspection," she insisted. "He refused to open up. The HOA has rules. I was within my right." The officer gave Elena a quick, knowing glance. Elena stepped forward, controlling her temper with visible effort. Being part of an HOA does not grant you the right to destroy private property. Breaking a door is vandalism. You can't claim that as a standard community inspection. Margaret tried to retort, but words stuck in her throat. The second officer snapped pictures of the damage, shaking his head as he documented the scene. "We'll need a statement from you," he told Margaret, "but be advised. This appears to be a clear-cut instance of vandalism and trespassing." My wife's presence amplified the tension. If Margaret had been dealing with a rank-and-file patrol officer, maybe she would have continued her entitled tantrum. But with the police chief herself standing there, a woman of authority, it was evident that Margaret was second-guessing her every move. "This is an HOA matter," Margaret repeated. desperation creeping into her tone. I was upholding community standards. That color is unauthorized. She pointed at the columns as if that justified everything. I let out a disbelieving laugh. You're risking arrest over a shade of white paint. Elena raised a brow. Miss Pierce, if you have concerns about paint color, you send a notice or file a civil complaint. Smashing a door is a criminal act. I suggest you stop digging yourself deeper. Margaret glared, then pivoted. Look, I'm sure we can work this out, she said, trying to sound more rational. I don't want to involve attorneys. The officer stepped aside with Elena. They quietly conferred about next steps. I suspected Elena was double-checking procedures to ensure no conflict of interest. Meanwhile, I watched Margaret struggle to maintain composure. She tapped her foot anxiously on the concrete, her eyes darting around the neighborhood. By now, a few onlookers had gathered across the street, curious about the police presence. I spotted my elderly neighbor, Miss S. Thompson, peeking through her curtains, mouth agape. The officer returned, pen in hand. We're going to have to escort you downtown for processing, he told Margaret calmly. This is property damage, and we have enough to proceed. You can call a lawyer if you wish. Margaret's eyes nearly popped out of her head. You can't be serious, she hissed. I'm the HOA president. People rely on me to keep the neighborhood in line. This is ridiculous. The officer offered a tight smile. MAAM, you're welcome to give a statement at the station. For now, please come quietly. Elena watched impassively, arms folded across her chest. I saw the slight tension in her jaw. She hated bullies, especially ones who targeted her family. Margaret, still in disbelief, allowed the officer to guide her to the cruiser. Before they opened the back door for her, she spun around, pointing at me. You'll regret this, she snarled. I'll make sure the HOA finds you into oblivion. I'll have you evicted for violating property guidelines. I felt a jolt of anger flare in my gut. Elena immediately placed a hand on my shoulder, calming me. The officer shook his head and motioned for Margaret to get inside the car. She did so reluctantly, scowling as the door closed behind her. The cruiser drove off, leaving the black SUV parked behind my mailbox. Elena let out a long breath. What a way to start the day, she muttered. I leaned against the splintered doorframe. I'm just glad nobody was hurt. But this is insane. She literally smashed my door because of columns. Elena sighed. We've had plenty of minor run-ins with that HOA, but nothing like this. I'll have to recuse myself from the official case, since it involves you and me directly. But the department can handle it. She studied the damage carefully. We'll file a proper insurance claim, and I'm sure we'll need new glass. Are you okay? My shoulders sagged with pent-up stress. Yeah, I'm fine. Just furious. We were going to pay the fee or handle the paperwork eventually, but none of that warrants property damage. Elena nodded, stepping over the shards to place a comforting hand on my arm. You should sweep this up, or let me send for a cleaning team. Then let's talk about how we'll proceed. Her gaze shifted to the neighbors who lingered across the street. Some waved sympathetically, while others merely stared, confused. I realized word would spread like wildfire in the community. The infamous HOA president just got arrested in front of my house. I'll handle the cleanup, I said. Thanks, Chief. I forced a small smile, trying to ease the tension. Elena gently patted my back. I'll swing by the dust station. Make sure the paperwork is in order. I'll see you soon. Once she left with the other officer, I grabbed a broom, dustpan, and some thick gloves. My thoughts churned as I swept up the shards. I couldn't help but question how the HOA had gone from sending petty violation letters to physically attacking my property. Did she think I'd back down? Was she this bold with other neighbors? Maybe we'd been singled out because we upgraded our home without explicit approval, but that was hardly a reason to smash someone's door. I spent the next hour cleaning and carefully taping cardboard over the open space. The last thing I needed was a stray animal wandering in. I kept replaying the confrontation in my head, my stomach churning at Margaret's final threat. I knew enough about HOAs to realize they could impose fines, but eviction, that would require serious legal maneuvering. I shook off a wave of anxiety and reminded myself that Elena was the police chief, and we weren't alone in dealing with this. Once the temporary fix was done, I rummaged through our house documents to find any paperwork we had about the columns. I discovered a half-finished form that Elena and I had started filling out months ago. requesting design approval from the board. It was never submitted. Life got busy. We forgot. And apparently, that was enough to unleash a vendetta. My phone buzzed. A friend in the neighborhood texted me. What the heck happened? Margaret got arrested. Word traveled fast. Indeed, I typed a quick reply, keeping details vague. Something told me I'd soon have plenty of inquisitive neighbors at my doorstep. It didn't take long. By midday, the sky was bright and warm, and I had a knock at my half-broken door. Through the taped cardboard opening, I saw the silhouette of two neighbors, Sarah and Michael, long-time residents who had once dealt with an HOA fiasco over their backyard fence. I opened what was left of the door. Sarah's eyes widened at the splinters and missing glass. My goodness, she gasped. Did she really do that? Michael shook his head, outraged. I saw the cop car, but I didn't realize it was that serious. I sighed, stepping aside to let them see the wreckage. Yeah, apparently she thinks our new porch columns are an affront to the community aesthetic, so she decided to forcibly inspect the premises. Sarah let out a soft expletive. I've heard stories about her being overzealous, but this is next level. Michael nodded. We had trouble with her last month over the height of our fence. She threatened us with a $500 per day fine. I could see the genuine concern in their expressions. Do you think she's done this to anyone else? I asked. They exchanged uneasy glances. Not that we know of, Sarah said carefully, but she's definitely bullied plenty of folks around here. Some were forced to pay huge fines or change their property features. She uses intimidation. Michael sighed. We were lucky. My brother's a dock contractor, so we lowered the fence in a hurry. Others haven't been so fortunate. My frustration deepened. It seemed we weren't the only ones on the receiving end of her mania. She's at the station now, I said. Police arrested her for vandalism. I'm hoping we can finally get some relief from her nonsense. Sarah offered a small, sympathetic smile. What can we do to help? We were thinking of telling the rest of the neighbors to come forward if they've had issues. Maybe if enough people speak up, the HOA board will realize they can't let her reign continue. I appreciated that idea. That sounds great, actually. The more evidence we have of her harassing residents, the better. She's not above the law, and hopefully the board will see that. Michael patted my shoulder. We'll rally the neighbors. Let us know if you need anything. My brother can help fix that door if your insurance won't cover it. My chest felt lighter. Despite Margaret's cruelty, there was a sense of solidarity building. Thank you, I said genuinely. I'll keep you posted. Sarah and Michael headed off. I gazed around at the quiet suburb. Sunlight bathed identical houses in a warm glow. Picket fences lined immaculate lawns, and the faint hum of distant traffic reminded me we were still near a bustling city. The calm belied the tension simmering beneath the surface, thanks to the overreach of one power-hungry HOA president, determined not to let this rattle me further. I spent the afternoon documenting everything. I took photos of the damage, typed up a timeline of events, and listed the steps we'd taken to comply with the basic HOA rules. My phone rang around 2:00. I was relieved to see Elena's name flash on the screen. Hey, she said, her tone firm, businesslike. Margaret has just finished giving her statement. She claims you provoked her by repeatedly ignoring official notices, which forced her to forcibly enter your property to verify safety. She's playing the victim, I snorted. That's insane. She literally shattered the door before I even woke up. Did she mention that? Elena let out a tired sigh. She's deflecting, but the officers are not buying it. We have enough grounds to charge her. However, she's out on bail now, so expect potential blowback. I wanted you to be aware. My stomach knotted. She's already out. Money talks, Elena said bitterly. It's not surprising. She's well connected in the area. I stepped away from the door, peering across the street, as if expecting to see Margaret prowling around. Is she banned from coming near our place? Elena paused. We can request a protective order if you feel threatened, but typically, that's something a court has to decide after a hearing. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache form. Maybe we should. She's unstable. Elena's voice softened. Let's talk about it tonight. For now, document everything. If she shows up again, call me immediately. We exchanged a few more words, then hung up. I tried to resume my chores, but unease coiled in my gut. Sure enough, half an hour later, I spotted a sleek black sedan crawling down the street, slowing in front of my house. Through the taped window, I noticed Margaret behind the wheel. She stared intently at me before driving on. My pulse quickened. Apparently, she was already out and about, unafraid to show her face. I gritted my teeth. This wasn't just a dispute over paint columns. It felt like a personal vendetta, determined not to let her intimidate me. I quickly stepped outside, phone in hand, snapping a photo of her car as it passed. She must have seen me, because she sped up abruptly and disappeared around the corner. I inhaled deeply, forcing myself to stay calm. For the next hour, I worked on repairing a few stray splinters around the doorframe, constantly glancing over my shoulder, half expecting her to return with a baseball bat. At times, I found myself cursing the day we ever bought this place, but I pushed those thoughts aside. This was our home. We had every right to enjoy it without fear. Evening approached. Golden light slanted across the street. I heard Elena's SUV pull into the driveway. She stepped out, still in uniform but with her jacket off, her expression drawn. Long day, I asked softly, meeting her at the door. She nodded, giving me a quick kiss. You have no idea. People at the station can't stop talking about the HOA lunatic who attacked the chief's spouse. It's caused quite a stir. A small part of me felt guilty for upending Elena's routine, but mostly, I was tsuyoshi, glad she was here. You mind stepping through cardboard? I said grimly, gesturing at the makeshift repair. She shook her head. I've seen worse crime scenes. Let's go inside. Once we settled in the living room, Elena scanned the scattered paperwork. You've been busy. I nodded. Neighbors came by. They said they'd gather testimonies. I also have a friend at the local news station who wants the story. I'm not sure if we should go public or not. Elena sat on the couch, stretching her neck. That depends on how far we want to push the HOA. Public exposure might force the board to address her conduct, but it could also provoke them to close ranks. HOAs can get defensive. My voice hardened. Let them. She's gone too far. Smashing someone's door is not an HOA issue. It's borderline psychotic. Elena exhaled, running a hand through her hair. I agree. We can consult our attorney friend, Lucas. He handles civil suits involving HOAs. If the community supports us, we might have a strong case. I sank onto the cushions beside her. The day's events weighed heavily. Let's do that. I'm tired of living under her tyranny. Elena leaned her head on my shoulder. Hey, we'll get through this. She picked the wrong house to terrorize. That brief moment of tenderness soothed my nerves. As night fell, we locked up carefully, aware that the front door was more vulnerable now. Elena insisted on parking her police cruiser out front for extra visibility. The night passed without incident, though I found myself waking at every creak and rustle, anxiety gnawing at my thoughts. The next morning, I checked my phone to find a barrage of messages from neighbors. Some described how Margaret had pressured them into paying fines for trivial reasons. Others recounted that they'd witnessed her rummaging through people's trash, searching for code violations. A few wanted to attend the next HOA board meeting, scheduled that weekend, to demand her resignation. Encouraged by the outpouring, I texted Sarah to coordinate. She said word was spreading like wildfire. Apparently, many residents were fed up with Margaret's bullying. The board meeting, an event that usually drew maybe a dozen people, might actually overflow with angry homeowners. I felt a spark of hope. If everyone joined forces, maybe we could reclaim our peaceful suburb. Elena left early to handle a morning shift at the station. Promising to check in, I decided to run errands, confident that broad daylight would deter Margaret from any more stunts. However, as I walked to my car, I noticed a suspicious envelope tucked under my wiper. My name was scrawled in large, angry letters. I opened it gingerly. Inside was a typed notice. You have 72 hours to remove unauthorized columns or face immediate legal action from the HOA. This time, we won't be so polite. My jaw clenched. Polite, I muttered out loud. They'd call smashing my door polite. I snapped a picture of the letter and texted it to Elena. She replied with a single word, ridiculous. I pocketed the letter, started my car, and headed to the hardware store. We needed a new sheet of glass and supplies for the door. Meanwhile, I mulled over how to approach the upcoming board meeting. Perhaps it was time to present all the evidence and demand Margaret be removed. Yet, I knew Ho, as often had labyrinthine rules about board positions. She might be able to cling to authority if the bylaws allowed it. At the hardware store, I ran into a neighbor, Tom, who recognized me from the fiasco. He offered a sympathetic ear. "Dude, I just heard what happened. That's insane," he frowned. "Margaret's got to be unhinged." I nodded. "She's out on bail and apparently doubling down." Tom shook his head in disbelief. "I'll be at the board meeting. We can't let her keep terrorizing folks." That conversation repeated itself in various forms throughout the day. Word spread, faster than wildfire, in a tight-knit suburb. By the time I got home, I had multiple voicemails from neighbors offering support or sharing their own stories of harassment by Margaret. I compiled them on my computer, creating a digital folder of testimonies. The more I read, the more stunned I became. She had threatened to tow cars, demanded families remove kids' playsets for not matching the neighborhood aesthetic, and even tried to fine a wheelchair-bound resident for having a ramp. My blood boiled at her cruelty. With each new revelation, my resolve hardened. A few days later, the weekend finally arrived. My door was partly fixed. The columns still proudly displayed their crisp white paint, and the HOA board meeting loomed. It was held in the community center, a modest building near the park. Typically, these gatherings were half empty, with board members rubber-stamping minor issues. This time, I arrived to find the parking lot jammed, cars overflowing into nearby streets. A buzz of angry chatter greeted me as I walked in. I spotted Sarah waving me over to a cluster of neighbors who'd set up chairs near the front. Michael was there, arms crossed, glaring at the board table, which sat on a small raised platform. "I've never seen a turnout like this," Sarah whispered. "We might actually get something done." The board members, 5 in total, looked uneasy. The seat at the center was presumably for Margaret, who had not yet arrived. The tension was palpable. Everyone was waiting for the big confrontation. Elena, dressed in civilian attire, slipped in quietly and took a seat near the back. She wanted to observe as a resident, not overshadow the proceedings. A hush fell over the room when the board president, an older man named Harold, tapped the microphone. "We'll call this meeting to order," he said, voice shaky. "We have quite a crowd tonight, so please keep remarks concise." He glanced at the empty seat next to him. "It seems our compliance chair, Miss Pierce Tice, is running late." A murmur swept through the audience. That was her official title, compliance chair, but everyone knew she effectively ran the board. Harold cleared his throat. "First, let's address old business." He was cut off by Sarah, who stood abruptly. "No disrespect, but many of us are here about Margaret Pierce's criminal behavior. Are we going to discuss that?" Applause and cheers erupted. Harold blinked, clearly uncomfortable. "I understand your concern, but we have a set agenda." Michael rose next. "People have had enough. She's harassed us for months, maybe years, and now she's physically attacking homeowners. We demand accountability." A roar of agreement filled the room. Harold held up his hands. All right. We'll move to address that first. Please, let's maintain order." He glanced at the other board members, who looked equally nervous. Then, with terrible timing, the doors swung open, and Margaret marched in. Her hair was disheveled. She wore a neat suit, but her expression radiated hostility. A hush descended as she strode down the aisle. Her eyes scanned the crowd, settling on me for a moment, lips curling in contempt. People whispered furiously as she took her seat at the board table. Harold coughed. "Miss Pierce, we were just about to discuss the complaints regarding your recent actions." She flicked a piece of imaginary lint from her sleeve. "I see. Go ahead." Harold hesitated. "We'd like to hear your explanation for what happened at Mr. Martinez's home." Margaret glowered in my direction. "I was performing a mandatory inspection for an ongoing violation. The occupant refused to grant access, so I had no choice but to break in to confirm structural compliance." The crowd erupted in angry jeers. "That's illegal," someone shouted. "You can't do that." "She's lying," called another voice. Harold repeatedly tapped his microphone, calling for order. It took nearly a minute for the volume to subside. Margaret's face turned red, but she pushed on. "HOA regulations allow us to ensure safety. This homeowner neglected repeated notices. I was forced into action, as we cannot let the neighborhood standard deteriorate." Laughter and outrage mingled. Sarah waved her hand for attention. What about the rest of us? You threatened us. Is that also part of safety? Michael chimed in. Or does bullying seniors count as mandatory inspections? Applause rippled across the room. Harold looked completely out of his depth. He waited for quiet, then gestured for me to speak. My pulse quickened as I rose from my seat. Thank you. Let's be clear, she shattered my front door at 6:00 in the morning. I never saw any final notice. Even if I had, that doesn't justify vandalism. This is a crime, not an HOA rule. Another wave of applause filled the space. Margaret shot me a hateful glare, but stayed silent. I pressed on. Also, I have evidence that numerous neighbors were harassed over petty issues or forced to pay exorbitant fines. Does the board condone her behavior? A balding board member squirmed uncomfortably. Harold rubbed the bridge of his nose. The board has been aware of some complaints, he admitted, but Miss Pierce assured us she was enforcing the bylaws fairly. A chorus of groans filled the air. Sarah stood again. We have dozens of statements saying otherwise. She's abused her position, terrorized people, and now physically attacked someone's home. I flipped open a folder I'd brought. I have copies of at least 20 statements from residents detailing intimidation and threats. Plus, my wife is the chief of police. A few gasps and scattered cheers sounded. She can confirm that Miss Pierce was arrested for vandalism. Margaret nearly leapt from her chair. This is a witch hunt. I did what was necessary. My position on the board gives me the authority to commit crimes. Sarah interrupted sarcastically. The crowd clamored again, half shouting that Margaret needed to go. Harold looked like he wanted to melt into his seat. Finally, he tapped the mic. All right, everyone, calm down. Clearly, there's serious concern about Miss Pierce's actions. I propose a motion to temporarily suspend her from her role until the criminal investigation concludes. Cheers thundered. Michael slapped his hands together. Margaret's face darkened. You can't do that. I've done more for this neighborhood than any of you. My lawyer will hear about this. Harold sighed. We'll let the board vote. All in favor of suspension. Raise your hand. 4 hands shot up around the table. Margaret's was the only one that stayed down. Applause and exhalations of relief rippled through the audience. Harold hammered the gavel. Motion passes. Margaret's face twisted with rage, but she said nothing. She gathered her papers, stuffing them into a bag. Before leaving, she jabbed a finger in my direction. This isn't over. You'll all regret humiliating me. Then she stormed out. The door slammed behind her, rattling the glass. Harold cleared his throat, looking both relieved and guilty. We'll appoint an interim compliance chair in the meantime. Folks, please submit any documented harassment claims to the board. We'll review everything. The meeting concluded with a sense of triumph in the air. People crowded around me. Sarah and Michael, thanking us for speaking up. Elena quietly slipped out, not wanting to overshadow the moment with her police rank. As neighbors congratulated me, I felt a swirl of relief, anger, and caution. This was a victory. But Margaret's parting words echoed in my mind. This isn't over. Late that evening, Elena and I sat on the porch swing. We'd spent a good hour after the meeting talking with neighbors, forging a plan to collectively push for transparency and fairness in the HOA. The battered door behind us still bore scars from Margaret's outburst, but somehow, the night felt lighter. Elena ran her hand along my arm. She's losing power. That's why she's lashing out. I nodded, glancing at the moonlit street. Still, she's dangerous. What if she tries something drastic? Elena exhaled slowly. We can look into a protective order. If she violates it, she'll face consequences. Silence lingered, interrupted only by the distant hum of a passing car. Then, Elena spoke again, voice low. I've dealt with criminals of all stripes, but there's something about a petty tyrant who terrorizes her own neighbors. It's both pathetic and frightening. I rested my hand over hers. We'll get through it. The community stands with us now. She nodded, leaning her head on my shoulder. I'm proud of you. You stood up for our home. I pressed a kiss to her temple, letting the tension unravel. Over the following days, the flurry of HOA business took a complicated turn. A new compliance chair was appointed, a soft-spoken man named Gregory, who seemed determined to rectify the board's reputation. He reached out to me directly, apologizing for Margaret's actions. We had no idea she was going to those extremes, he insisted. We genuinely believed she was just firm about the rules. I wasn't entirely convinced but appreciated his candor. Together, we discussed the possibility of revising the guidelines so that minor infractions wouldn't escalate. Meanwhile, rumors swirled that Margaret was filing a lawsuit against the board for wrongful suspension, claiming she was only enforcing existing bylaws. She insisted the door smashing was taken out of context. My attorney friend, Lucas, found that laughable. There's no context in which smashing a door is legal, he quipped. Despite her threats, we pressed forward. The local news ran a story about HOA harassment, featuring a short interview with me and a few other neighbors. We didn't mention Elena's position, choosing to keep her rank from overshadowing the broader narrative. The coverage ignited a wave of sympathy calls and emails from people in other towns who'd suffered under tyrannical HOAs. Slowly, the story gained traction. Meanwhile, Elena kept watch whenever she was home. She took off her uniform at the end of shifts, but there was no missing the determined set of her jaw that said she'd protect our property at any cost. Each morning, I checked the yard, the door, the street, alert for any sign of Margaret. Though we heard rumors she was lurking around, we never spotted her directly. A few times, Sarah reported seeing her car drive slowly past different houses in the neighborhood, as if she were gathering intel. The tension was real, but the community stayed united. We began organizing a neighborhood watch. Michael volunteered to coordinate, ensuring that if Margaret tried anything like before, we'd have eyes on the situation. People took turns strolling the streets in pairs, phones at the ready. About 2 weeks after the board meeting, our security cameras captured a strange event at 2:00 in the morning. A figure approached our front porch, wearing a hooded jacket, fiddled with something near the columns, then fled when the motion-activated light turned on. The footage was grainy, but the shape was suspiciously similar to Margaret's height. We found plastic ties and a bottle of chemical paint remover left behind. She'd intended to damage the columns. That was enough for Elena to push for a protective order. A judge granted it based on the evidence of repeated harassment and the pending criminal charges. If Margaret came near our property again, she'd be arrested on the spot. We served her the paperwork via her attorney, ensuring she'd know about the restriction. The sense of relief was tangible, yet part of me wondered how far she'd go for revenge. The next big milestone was her criminal trial, scheduled a few weeks later. Word circulated that she had a high-priced lawyer who intended to argue that she was acting in an official capacity and that I overreacted. However, the police report included photos of the shattered door, plus numerous eyewitness accounts. My wife, as the chief of police, had made sure the evidence chain was unassailable, though she stepped back from direct involvement to avoid conflict of interest. On the day of the trial, the courthouse hummed with curiosity. Several neighbors showed up, wanting to see justice served. I spotted Sarah in the hallway, flipping through a magazine, her eyes flicking up each time a new person entered. Michael arrived in a polo shirt, arms folded, determined to watch the proceedings. Elena accompanied me for moral support, but took a seat in the back, letting me handle the matter as the main witness. A hush fell when Margaret walked in with her lawyer. She wore a sleek navy suit, hair pinned back severely, eyes scanning the room. Her face twitched with tension at the sight of so many neighbors glaring her way. The prosecutor presented a straightforward case. Margaret trespassed, forcibly destroyed the front door, and threatened me. The defense tried to paint her as a dedicated HOA officer performing her duties, claiming I'd refused her official inspection. They also insinuated that because my wife was a police chief, we'd orchestrated a vendetta, but the evidence was two clear photos of the shattered door, my frantic 911 call log, the statements from neighbors about Margaret's unhinged approach. It all added up to a glaring pattern of abusive behavior. Margaret took the stand, voice quivering, claiming she'd been bullied by the entire community. She insisted the door was faulty, that she simply tapped on it, and it broke due to poor maintenance. The prosecutor coolly displayed the pictures of the large hammer-like tool found at the scene. The jury's skepticism was palpable. The trial lasted 3 days. On the final afternoon, the judge delivered a verdict: guilty of vandalism, trespassing, and harassment. Margaret's jaw tightened. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the spectators. The sentence included probation, mandatory community service, and a hefty fine that matched the cost of the damage. More importantly, the judge upheld the protective order, barring her from coming within 200 yards of my property or from holding any position of authority in the HOA for the duration of her probation. Sarah and Michael suppressed cheers. A wave of applause nearly erupted but was hushed by the court bailiff. As Margaret was escorted out, she shot me a poisonous glance. I held my ground, arms crossed, refusing to be cowed. Once we exited the courthouse, neighbors clustered around me and Eleanor. Some tears were shed. A sense of catharsis filled the air. People thanked Elena for her unwavering stance on the law, for not letting Margaret bully us. Elena simply smiled. I'm just glad justice prevailed. The local press snapped photos. They caught one of me hugging Sarah, relief etched into our faces, and another of Michael shaking my hand. For a suburban community, this was a dramatic chapter, one that ended in accountability for a bully who'd wielded the HOA as her personal weapon. Over the subsequent weeks, the new compliance chair worked diligently to revise guidelines, emphasizing constructive dialogue over punitive measures. The tension in our neighborhood eased significantly. People redecorated their homes without constant fear. Families set up small gatherings, barbecues, and block parties. My columns remained gleaming white, standing as a symbol of resilience. Elena and I finally replaced the entire front door with a sturdier, modern design. It looked beautiful, welcoming, yet secure. Whenever neighbors passed by, they'd compliment the door and share a grin at the memory of what it represented, Margaret's downfall. One late summer evening, we hosted a gathering on our porch for the folks who'd stood by us. Strings of fairy lights twinkled overhead. The scent of grilled vegetables drifted through the air. Sarah and Michael chatted with a group in lawn chairs, while children played tag on the lawn. Elena, off duty, laughed warmly at a joke someone told. I soaked in the atmosphere, reflecting on how close we'd come to letting one tyrant poison our sense of home. Instead, we'd fought back and inspired others to do the same. As dusk deepened, Elena slipped her hand into mine. You did good, she murmured, her eyes shining in the soft light. We did good, I corrected, squeezing her fingers gently. Music played in the background as neighbors told stories, forging new bonds that made the community stronger than ever. In the weeks that followed, I heard that Margaret had moved out of the subdivision altogether, her new restrictions too heavy a burden in a place where she'd once ruled with an iron fist. Occasionally, her name popped up in conversation as a cautionary tale, how unchecked authority, fueled by arrogance, leads to downfall. Meanwhile, Elena continued her duties as police chief, championing fairness in every corner of our district. We never rubbed her rank in anyone's face we didn't have to. Our actions spoke louder than any title could. And as the sun set on our porch one more time, I leaned back in the chair, the warm glow washing over my shoulder. That battered door had been replaced, but the memory of the glass shards glinting on the ground remained a reminder that even in the most tranquil suburbs, trouble can brew behind manicured lawns and neat fences, yet also a reminder that courage, unity, and a refusal to back down can mend what's broken and rekindle a community's spirit. I glanced at Elena, who was sipping iced tea and chatting with an elderly neighbor who used to tremble whenever she saw an HOA notice. Now, that neighbor laughed easily, unafraid. The sight sparked gratitude in my chest, gratitude that my wife was both my protector and partner, gratitude for the neighbors who stood together, gratitude for the chance to rebuild a stronger, kinder neighborhood, free from tyranny. We had faced the wrath of the ultimate HOA Karen, endured property damage, and overcome intimidation, but in the end, that same fury led her straight to a courtroom where justice shone its unyielding light. Our door might have been smashed, but our resolve never cracked. With the right support, we preserved our home and safeguarded our peace. I breathed in the balmy evening air, letting contentment settle deep in my bones. Tomorrow, life would go on. No more threatening letters shoved under wipers, no more hammered glass at dawn, no more secret dread of stepping outside. Instead, just the hum of everyday existence, yard work, porch conversations, and the knowledge that when push came to shove, we stood up for our home. Elena caught my gaze and smiled. I returned it, silently thankful for every twist and turn that had led us to this peaceful moment on our porch. All was calm at last.